Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Optimising Human Performance podcast. I'm Jonpaul Nevin.
I'm Martin Jones, and today we're talking to one of the most experienced and influential performance psychologists around, Professor Dave Collins.
The brain is more important than the body. The brain can push the body to be places it doesn't want to be. If the brain don't want to be there, it won't be there. And it'll find some excuse or some reason why it won't.
Dave shares his experience of working with some of the world's most accomplished performers.
Lots of people who make it to the top level have had traumatic lives. Some upsets, and getting through those upsets and having the confidence that I can are essential precursors to getting to the top.
We discuss everything from talent identification to the 10 psychological skills that can be used to achieve success, including quality practice and imagery.
I think imagery is a really, really useful skill. The Swiss Army knife of sports psychology. It can do all sorts of things. I'm teaching young athletes imagery for when they get injured, because they will.
Hi Dave, and welcome to the Optimising Human Performance podcast. How are you doing?
Keeping out of trouble, thank you, gents, and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It's our pleasure, and I'm glad to hear you keeping out of trouble, Dave. Can we start off by just rolling straight across to you to give us your history? Who are you? What do you do? And how did you get there?
Okay, Dave Collins from Essex, which is clearly a bad start. Into Sandhurst, transferred Royal Marines. Came out of that, I went into teaching, went from that to do a master's degree in sports psych, then ended up in university work, PhD in psychology. Been working in performance since, 1983. Now chair at Edinburgh University, chair in Dublin, and my own company. So trying to decide what I'll do when I grow up.
That's a lot in a career. You've done a hell of a lot of different things.
Well, I am a very old fart, so yeah.
So what took you then from a military background into teaching in academia? What drew you across?
Long story short, when I went to college, we were sitting in one of the physiology tests, and the guy said, we're going to do a max test. And I put my hand up and go, how do we know it's a max test? And he looked at me, you stupid boy. Well, because they stop. And I just spent several years not stopping because either someone shot at me or someone put a size 13 up my arse. So I went, okay, maybe this thing, the brain, is more important than the body. One of my favourite studies is a study on volitional exhaustion and fitness. In other words, you run till you stop, with American football guys. And they all did the test. And then the following week, they changed the sex of the tester and they all got fitter. That's strange. So the brain, for me, and for lots and lots of research, is more important than the body. The brain can push the body to be places it doesn't want to be. If the brain don't want to be there, it won't be there. And it'll find some excuse or some reason why it won't. So that's why I became a psychologist, and that's why I wanted to study that, because as far as I could see, getting people to run at people when they're shooting at you is not logical, it's not sensible, so you con them. Getting kids to do what you want them to do as a teacher, you've got to convince them that that's what they wanted to do in the first place. So I was very drawn to the idea of psychology. My work, my research has been, if I describe it as psychophysiology, that's probably the easiest way. My doctorate was in EEG, brainwaves. I've done kinematics, biomechanical movements, biochemistry, as well as the more usual sort of interview questionnaire type stuff as well. Because the brain and the body are connected. It's a system. And you've got to look at all the different components of the system, but as importantly, or perhaps more importantly, how they interact.
Absolutely.
And my job as a performance psychologist, people say, your job is to motivate people. And frankly, I say, well, no, if they're not motivated, I don't want to work with them. They're not worth it. My job is probably to calm down their motivation or to show them ways in which they can go to places that they didn't think they could get.
That resonates with me. Telling people to slow down is sometimes the thing they need rather than speeding up. They can definitely do that on their own.
I agree with you completely, but one other fact. It also helps them, in rugby terms, to time their run. So when do you slow down? When do you run at 109%? So, sex, comedy, and being a performance psychologist, it's all about timing.
Good one. I like that, Dave. That's good. You've done a lot, as I said, in your career. You've worked with some pretty eminent people across lots of different contexts. I know you've done some work around excellence and what it means to be excellent in these high stress, high stakes, high reliability roles, be that sport, defense, the corporate sector, I don't know, all these different areas that require something special. I'm going to ask you a difficult question on that. Like, can we filter out and distill down what it is about excellence? What does it take to become the best in what you do? Have you got an opinion on that?
Given I've been researching it since 1980 something, I bloody well ought to, shouldn't I?
That's what I was hoping.
Okay, so What we tried to do was to distill, as you said, and codify what it was. And we came up with 3 big categories. The category that I think you possibly want me to talk about most will be work called the Psychological Characteristics of Developing Excellence, which is a mouthful. The PCDEs, a set of 10 skills that you can have that, irrespective of domain, and so far we've checked high-performance sport, military settings, dance, not a pretty sight in my case, music, business, surgery, yada, yada, yada. So here are a set of characteristics which, deployed in the right way for the right domain at the right time, work to make you excellent. The other 2, which we might touch on if we've got time, is looking at the environment, characteristics of the environment that make that happen, and then finally, the behaviours of the coach and the way in which the coach does things and how she or he enacts and co-acts with the aspirant performer. And that's led to another professional judgment and decision-making, which is the choices that the coach makes, how she or he then sets up practice, co-acts and enacts with the performer. But the primary answer to your question, Martin, is those PCDEs, those 10 skills. Consider them like a hand of cards. You face a challenge and you then say, well, I think I'll take a bit of imagery, a bit of goal setting, a bit of self-regulation. That'll solve the problem. In a month's time, it might be a different 3. So it's pretty much trying to give people a collection of skills which they can deploy towards the outcome they want. Those outcomes, there are lots of different ones. Lots of people talk about resilience. I think it's an overused term because we're never clear what the flipping heck it means. It also means different things to different people at different times. Sorry if you've had a speaker on talking about it. I'm sure you have. There's lots of people talk about the R word.
We have, and they've said the same thing. Like, it's a consistent comment that resilience is a buzzword.
It's only one of the buzzwords, because another buzzword might be growth mindset, which they're equally unclear about how you achieve, or grit, which is one that's been used a lot in the American military across a variety of things. 15 years ago, it was mental toughness, which was an equally ill-defined, equally amorphous, can be anything. So you've got this underpinning set of skills, and ours are called the PCDEs, there are others, which will then enable you to use those skills to achieve certain outcomes, which could be resilience, grit, growth mindset. If you're in football, it's called the 5 C's model or the DNA, all these different sets of outcomes. But the fundamental thing is that you've got a bunch of skills that you can then use, you can deploy at different times in different ways with different people to achieve whatever outcome they want to achieve at that time.
Makes sense. So I'd use a similar analogy. I think I don't use the PCDs framework per se, but I think of it like a golf bag. Any hole on a golf course requires different combinations of different clubs based on the lie that you find yourself in, which sounds very similar.
It is. It's very similar. We'd be quite comfortable with the PCDEs because there's probably, 60 plus papers, not all ours, published in it, and they've made use of it. We've got a measurement that goes with it, that measures it and gives you indicative feedback, formative feedback as to where you might need some work. But yeah.
Dave, I'm just going to step back one. It was just as you were taking us through those 3 areas, how would you define excellence in a high-stress, high-stakes context?
I define excellence in any context by someone performing at or even beyond their potential. So when I was fit, I could run 5 miles at 6-minute mile paces with boots and pack, and I was very pleased with that. Because at the same time, I could free squat reps at 280. That's kilos, not pounds. So I was better at certain things than others. Anything high skill, I was snookered at. Running into things or hitting people, I was great at. Now I'm 71. I'm still squatting 250 for reps with metal knees. I'm very pleased. So excellence is a personally referenced topic. So if I'm now in a high-stakes environment, and a high-stakes environment could be sporting, which I think Chataway described as war without weapons, or it's military, or it's fire service, or it's business, or it's whatever, then excellence is me achieving and surpassing my potential. And that's not what I think my potential is, it's what an absolute measure says, actually, we think you can do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, really interesting. Thank you.
Can we go back to those 10? What are the 10 characteristics?
So we've got these 10 PCDEs. They've evolved over the years. They are commitment, focus and distraction control, realistic performance evaluation, self-regulation, role clarity, planning and organisation, goal setting and self-reinforcement, quality practice, imagery, and creating and using social support. You'll notice they're not distinct. They're very interacting and interactive, which is why you use them in particular blends. The basic idea is that you develop those skills, but developing those skills is essentially done in tandem with deploying them. So we have a structure: teach, test, tweak, repeat. So you teach the skills, you test them, you refine them by discussion, debrief, and then you go around the cycle again. And the more you use those skills across a variety of different domains, so that you're confident you can do it here and here, and the more you do it in a variety of different accelerating challenges, then the better you get and the stronger your skill set.
Dave, I just want to dive into one of those ones that sort of sprung out, is quality practice. What would you define as quality practice? And do you find that a lot of contexts people don't achieve that, and then in other contexts you have people that can apply quality practice?
Right. A simple example. Here's some mental arithmetic. 3 6s.
18.
3 times 6.
18.
3 times 6.
18.
3 times 6.
18.
3 times 6.
18.
After the first time when you think, what's this twit trying to do? And the second time he's trying to make me look stupid. You're not thinking, are you?
No, you're just repeating.
Right. 3 times 6.
18.
5 8s.
40.
7 8s.
I'm glad you're asking you, JP, and not me.
Now, apart from the fact that I never trust a PT core guy to say last hill, because his geography and his arithmetic are shite, I'm also going, now you're thinking. And thinking is essential for quality practice. You have to reflect on it. So if I'm a golfer and I go to practice my shots, I don't take a bucket of balls and just go whack, 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 because practice makes
permanent.
Practice makes permanent. Thank you. Right? So if practice makes permanent, I'm making myself permanently good at mediocrity. Whereas if I stop and go, I'm going to do 30 balls, I'm going to draw them this way or draw them that way or land it there. Here are my criteria. That's what I've got to hit. Now all of a sudden my practice is of higher quality. And interestingly, we took the PCDEs from some earlier work by a guy called Terry Orlick. What he came up with was that quality practice was one of the biggest markers for golfers. That actually, if you're going to get to the top in golf, what you practice must be repeating and making permanent good quality. So quality practice means I'm taking the time and the trouble and the mental effort to make sure that I'm really focused on doing something well. Lots of people poo-poo repetition, or say repetition without repetition. It's a bit glib. You need some repetition, but you need repetition with focus. You're thinking about what's going through and you're reviewing it. You're making sure it's top quality. I'm practicing high quality with a level of intensity and a level of focus that ensures it's top line. Happy with that?
Spot on.
Thank God for that.
Can we loop back to the other bit you talked about? You mentioned briefly talent ID, talent development. Let's start with talent ID, finding the right people.
Right.
There's a lot of research on this. You've done tons. Other people have done tons. It's a bit contradictory sometimes. What are the big hitters in talent ID, in your opinion?
Quite early on, we realised that for a whole variety of pragmatic and financial reasons, focus was very much on the identification. I don't think identification works very well until you're of a certain age and stage. So development is for me of much more interest, because when you identify something that's polluted by relative age. Am I relatively older or relatively younger than the group you're identifying me against? Or physiology, because physiology changes. You get bigger, smaller, or differentially bigger, smaller, you catch up or whatever. You're also talking about previous experience. If mum and dad sent someone to a golf professional at 4, they're likely to show more potential than someone who started golf at 14. So all of these identification things are polluted or coloured or affected by these different things that people have gone through. So I prefer to have a system where I I less and D more. Because when I D more, I pick up those late developers, or I pick up the guys who've gone through experiences that have taught them those skills, and away we go. Doesn't mean I don't I, and it doesn't mean there aren't circumstances where you have to I. But you're sensible if you I with an eye on what the person's gone through to get there.
Yeah, I get that. How about in scenarios where maybe you've got an adult cohort, something like the Royal Marines, arduous training, or even Sandhurst as a selection criteria to get into there? Have you got any thoughts about how you can apply your research and your knowledge into helping select or identify the right adults? Is it the same thing? Do we have to look at their background in a similar sort of way? Or can we use things like your PCDEs to identify who's got the foundations that we can then train?
It's a great question, and it's a frustration to me that we know a lot about this and it's not used. In short, if I wish to identify the biggest, meanest, nasty beggars in the world, then I just look around and find the guys with the worst scars and the big knuckles, etc., etc. In other words, my identification is de facto. So if I put someone on some selection process, I just batter them all and see who survives. That works because it does its job, doesn't it? The problem is I'll always make some mistakes. I'll have some what are called false positives, where I think someone is great and actually they don't make it. Now, we've done studies on that with kids at 15, 16, and we found out that the biggest factor in terms of people who are seen to have fantastic potential but don't make it is a lack of set of skills like the PCDEs. I also not only have false positives, but I have problem misses. I might miss someone who's absolutely magnificent for the job that I'm selecting for, but they had a bad day at the office, or they just had a bit of bad luck, or they made a navigational mistake or whatever. So all I'm saying is that recognise that any identification process is not 100%. It'll have some false positives, which of course you can weed out later, but it'll also have some bad misses. Interestingly, in business, people talk about most companies spending 20% of their time on hire and 80% of their time getting rid of the hiring mistakes they made because they didn't spend enough time on a hire in the first place. So again, even with adults, of course, there's a pragmatic, I need 10 blokes and I need them now, but why don't I make sure that they've got access to and knowledge of the skills they need on the way through? Because now I decrease the number of false positives, but I also decrease the number of bad misses.
Dave, so obviously there's been a lot of work being published by Christian Jonpaul, who I believe was one of your PhD students recently, looking at the application of mental skills training and various other attributes within a soft community. Could you give us an insight into that work and obviously how that feeds into what we've just been talking about there in regards to talent ID?
So most people in most performance domains in the Western world are being taught sports psych. Some very poorly, some quite well, but they're at least aware of what the skills are. These guys who'd gone through and been successful in joining Norwegian soft communities had not received that sort of tuition or that knowledge. They were already in. They'd seen selection as a selection, but also, and I passionately agree with this, as a training mechanism, a confirmation mechanism. I'm doing something right because, look, I'm passing. Yeah? So that the guys who were the operators already had a set of skills and knew they had a set of skills. What Christian did was go in and teach them some more skills or reinforce some of the skills they actually had but they didn't know they had, but also show them how they could be put together to address aspects of missions. And all the guys went, this is great, this is really good. And they did that at the end of the training course before they went on the job, and they did that after they'd done the job, and they then did it a year later. So they said, we didn't know how much we didn't know, we didn't know how much we did know. So actually doing it through that mechanism was good. Now, for me, as an academic, that's really interesting because the skills I'm talking about, they're not only learnt when you teach them. So in an entirely separate study, we looked at 7 and 8-year-olds joining a Premiership Category 1 football academy, and they weren't skillless. Of course they weren't. How did they get there in the first place? So they weren't blank slates. They had strengths and weaknesses. So what we were saying there was, if you're now the coach of the under-8s, you should assess them because they're already arrived with skills. And what you do is you build those skills and you fill the deficiencies. And if I was working with adults in a high-performance sports setting, military setting, business setting, I'd do the same thing. I also, just because someone has come from one high-performance setting, wouldn't assume that they can take those skills and transfer them into this new setting. Some people can, some people can't. Just because I was good at this does not mean I'll be good at this. And just because I was good at this does not mean I'll be good teaching other people to be good at this.
If we talk about talent transfer, the transition from one high performance context like the military, like sport, and then you're in something else. And I think there is a lot of preconceived ideas that that person performs well under stress because they've run off the back of a helicopter and someone shot at them. So I'll put them in the boardroom and they'll be really good at handling stress. But as you quite rightly point out, it doesn't work. For some it does, for some it doesn't. Are there things that the likes of you and I and other people who are supporting people in transition, are there things that we could do before the transition, during the transition, that helps people understand the skills they have, how to apply them, and just ease that transition?
Excellent question. My answer's in 3 parts. Part 1 is teach the skills or develop the skills in an adaptable fashion. The number of high-level athletes I work with who are fantastically organised in their competitive lives and handling the pressures of competition, but they can't transfer it to coping with a weekend at home with the family. Yeah, so they've learnt it here, but they can't apply it here. You teach the skills in an adaptable fashion. Second, when someone comes into a setting, they should do some form of evaluation of what's needed. Certain things are appropriate in one setting which need to be deployed in a different way in a different setting. In part, that is what the system thinks it needs, but in part, it's what the system might actually need. And then the middle bit, which is the focus of your question, is to work with people pre-transition on what they've got and how adaptable it is, and work with them through and into transition in how they can take their strengths and adjust them and apply them, and how they can address their areas for development, and then to meet the new challenge. Because interestingly, there's lots of research that shows you're okay when you're under pressure in a given setting. It's the transitions that are the beggar. So I'm okay in prison, relatively speaking. When I come out, that transition is difficult. I'm okay in the military, however pressured, the transition is difficult. I'm okay as a professional footballer, rugby player, whatever. But the transition, especially if it's forced on me by injury, that transition's the beggar. Preparing for transition, evaluating the new target, and supporting through the transition, that's the 3-part answer.
So the example of the career-ending injury, most people don't see that coming, right? It's typically an accident.
Well, no, because if I did, I wouldn't do it.
But is that why it's so difficult? Because there's been no pre-transition planning.
Oh, completely. So what I would do, I'd say, what can you do next? Yeah? What else could you do? I think imagery is a really, really useful skill. I think I've described it as the Swiss Army knife of sports psychology. It can do all sorts of things. I'm teaching young athletes imagery for when they get injured, because they will. I'm looking forwards to the moment when, and I'm anticipating through it. So, for example, we've got a Winter Olympics next February, March. Now-ish, I'm working with any athlete I'm working with about what will happen after the Olympics. Because then there's a time loop and they can focus on the Olympics without keep looking over the wall and going, but what's going to happen next? So you sort that out and then you can focus on the job you're doing.
Your research on imagery, Dave, is both a gift and a curse. And so bear with me while I get through this question. PETTLEP imagery is incredibly useful. And I'll let you explain what PETTLEP is in a second and how you came about it. I find it the most useful framework and use it all the time. The curse is it's so intuitive that people who do not have a clue about imagery think they can teach it. And a lot of what I have had to do over the years is take people who've been taught a version of a PETTLEP imagery for the completely wrong functions and having to undo it. So imagery is great. And as I say, your work on imagery has been very useful to me, but it's also been a bit of a pain at times. Can you just describe PETTLEP? Because loads of people know it, but they don't know what it really is meant to do and what it's used for.
Okay. There's lots of different types of imagery is the first thing. So PETTLEP might apply to lots, but it doesn't apply to all. It's basically a sort of a suggestion that if you're going to try and do imagery, then you want to try and make the imagery conditions more like the actual executional conditions. So Physical, you don't lie on the ground and relax most of the time if what you're going to be doing is executing under pressure. You get physical, you get physically fatigued, for example. Environment, the environment is similar, the task is similar, the timing is similar, you don't do it in slow motion. You look at the state of learning that the person's in, so they would do different types and natures of imagery when they're learning the skills to when it's well established. You do emotional equivalence. So if I'm going to be nervous doing something, I imagine doing it nervous, and I look at the perspective, whether the perspective is internal or external, what I'm looking at, etc., etc. That's the PETTLEP. But like I say, it applies some of the time in certain places. I think there's a lovely saying, everything works somewhere, but nothing works everywhere. So PETTLEP's great, imagery is superb, but you've got imagery, visualization, mental simulation of movement. You've got all sorts of different purposes of it. You've got some people who would deny the importance completely of internal representation, which I think is misinformed, because you've got lots and lots of very high-level performers who use imagery. So it doesn't mean they're all right, but it means they're more likely to be right than someone who sits there and goes, thou shalt not.
Dave, if we were to look at it from the applied perspective, so let's say we've got a group of individuals who are, let's say, military personnel, they are trained and they're about to be taken over an assault course, an obstacle course. They know the skill, however, you feel as a coach that this could be developed, both individually, the competencies getting over these obstacles, and also potentially working as a team to get over some of the more higher obstacles, shall we say. So with that scenario, how would you go about, as a practitioner, applying the PETTLEP model or something similar to get them thinking and visualising and applying imagery?
I want to get their imagery working in the right physical state. So what I would be doing is I'd be going, okay, I want you to image this physically tired. So I might get them to image the test that they're going to do in a circumstance of being on an exercise bike. When I work with judoka, they would imagine fighting a particular opponent on the walk back of horrible anaerobic throw-up intervals, because they're going to fight physically knackered. So they're imagining, they're rehearsing what they're going to do against this bloke or this bloke, physically knackered. The environment, clearly, I might get them to image in kit. Now, for something like an assault course, there's no particular specialist kit. If I've worked with skeleton bobsleigh, then they've laid on the skeleton. If I've worked with skiers, they put the boots on. The emotion, are you anxious about this? The Tarzan assault course and the bottom field in Royal Marines, you've got to do it in, I think it's 13 minutes enlisted, 12 minutes officer. I want to pace myself. I want to imagine myself doing it. Where would I be after that long? I wouldn't fly around it with a big red cape and my underpants on the outside, because I can't do it. I would have a realistic sort of timing. And I'd be anxious as I did it. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to embed in my head a feeling, a set of instructions, if you like, a program, the process I will follow that will get me around that course under 12 minutes. Not in 5 minutes, but certainly not in 15.
For that sort of idea, does the individual have to have previous experience, so like they've got something they can reflect upon for the model to be effective, or can you try and run them through it dry?
Excellent point. Again, you've been reading, which is always dangerous.
JP can't read.
But yes, of course, if I've got previous experience, I can draw on what I'm imagining. When we watch stuff with which we have some empathy, we twitch about. It's like us watching the end of a 400 metre, go on, whatever. Like that. When we do that, we're drawing on our experience and we're extrapolating it to what we think she or he, the performer, is feeling. If I've had a reasonably similar experience, then my feelings will be more accurate to what they'd be feeling, but my feelings are my feelings. So if Martin's a different build to me, if I watch Martin doing something, my feelings that I would get to empathise with or to mentally rehearse from are translated into me. Makes sense? So if I've got some previous experience, that's more better, because it makes mine more likely to generate a more vivid for me feeling, picture, If I can't, then it helps if my instructor, coach, psychologist says, now you've done that, think of doing that like this. So what you do is you link the known and extend it into the potential for the unknown. Any slalom athlete are not allowed to go down the course. So if you go to a slalom kayaking course, slalom athletes are not allowed to go down the course. And you'll see guys walking down the side, looking at the water, they're seeing themselves, but they're feeling what they'd feel. So you'll see them spin round and wave their arms about and do all sorts of stuff so that they're rehearsing the movements off the water that they will execute on the water. Now, they've got lots of experience, but they're still extrapolating what they've felt to this situation that they've never felt, but they're going to feel.
Spot on, thank you.
Yeah, that makes loads of sense. Another.
Don't sound so surprised.
Yeah, every now and then you come out with some good stuff.
I know, mate. I'm amazed myself. It's remarkable.
Another good thing you've come up with that, again, I've seen people really misinterpret it. And JP, I'm going to get this in before you do. This idea of stress inoculation, trauma inoculation. JP asks this question every episode. But you've got the Rocky Road hypothesis, right? And I remember that paper coming out and reading it and thinking, oh, yeah, this makes loads of sense to me. Can you tell us what your Rocky Road is? And then maybe bust any myths around what it is or what it isn't.
Okay, the paper, which was myself and colleague Anya McNamara, was in 2012. At the time, it was just an exposition that said, you know what? Lots of people who make it to the top level have had traumatic lives. They've experienced trauma. Not all of them, but some of them. And this led us to postulate that some trauma on the way up was useful. And what we've done since then is we've empirically shown that. What we haven't done is what another famous study claimed, which was every single multiple medalist that Great Britain had at a certain stage has experienced a juxtaposition of early trauma and a sporting success. Now, we didn't think that was right, so we ran a study ourselves, and they had 16 out of 16, we had 2 out of 16. So I don't think it is. Other people have hated the use of the word trauma, because I think they're imagining that we chase kids with baseball bats, that we make them upset, we make them cry, etc., etc. Absolutely not. What we've said is that it is traumatic. So if I'm trying to get selected to a rugby team and I don't make it, I'm upset. It is traumatic for me. If it isn't traumatic for me, I couldn't give a monkeys. Why would I try anyway? So some upsets on the way to the top, some coping with upsets and getting through those upsets and having the confidence that I can are for us essential precursors to getting to the top. So if I see someone progressing smoothly like a swan on the water in a nice line, I'll put some speed bumps in. Because what I want to do is I want to show them that they've got the skills and the confidence and how to deploy them to get to the top. Is trauma, like beasting people, an essential? No, it's quite common, but it's not essential. Being upset, finding things traumatic and overcoming them, really important growth if you use them right, Does that answer the question? Or?
It does. That does answer the question. And I think coming back to one of the original questions, you mentioned the third bit was the coach behavior.
Yes.
Can we tie them together? If I'm a coach, if I'm dealing with a group of people and I'm instructing them, trying to help them develop and learn, what do I need to know in terms of your vast experience in this area? Is there anything that the listeners who are maybe in instructing roles or coaching roles can take away?
Anybody who tells you this is absolutely the only way you should do it is talking absolute twaddle. I will give you one quick example. There's a guy called Mostyn. He came up with a thing called the teaching style spectrum. At one end was command style. Do this, then this, like this. At the other end was a discovery learning type thing. If you teach abseiling by discovery learning, you will get lots of paperwork because lots of people will die. So you do it in a very structured, do this, do this, do this. You tell them what to do, you show them how to do it, you encourage that, that's it. If I was to teach a creative dance class, which is not a common part of my vernacular, but if I was, and I was to teach it by command style, I'd be an idiot, because the level of creativity I would get from my dance would be nothing. So, are either of those two extremes wrong? No. Are they right? It depends. It depends on the circumstance, on what I want and what I'm dealing with as learners. So, drilling, stoppage drills, seems to me pretty sensible. It's something I need to execute in a certain way, under pressure, coming up with creative answers. But what if this happens? Or let's see if we can create a new way of doing this. Requires a completely different style. So I would be talking about this idea of professional judgment decision-making, which is the posh application of it depends. The coach thinking how she or he wants the people to learn and be, and then choosing a variety of different tools to do that. The coach will use different tools in different ways, in different blends at different times. That, to me, that's pretty fundamental. Asking someone who coaches to say, how would I coach this? And listening and reflecting on what bits you could and what bits you wouldn't, or what bits you wouldn't yet use is absolutely right. When you watch something, you think, why and why not? Why would I use it? Why would I not use it? Why would it be better for me to use that as opposed to this person? So I run a company of 14 people, lots of different shapes and sizes to support psychs, and therefore will deploy skills in different ways. There isn't one way of skinning a cat. There are lots of different ways. But when you do that, you're looking at, okay, when would that be useful? When wouldn't it be? So again, I suggest for all instructors, for all coaches, for all teachers, what outcome do you want? What mechanisms will a person go through to get there? Therefore, what tools are best for me to use?
Critical appraisal on behalf of the coach is essential then, right? If you're just going to coach off a textbook in a standardized way, it's never going to work. You've got to recognize the situation, the constraints, all those different things. That's a core skill for a coach. Would that be right?
Completely and utterly. Yeah, it's the essential thinking about, being critical. But deciding on that ultimate blend depends on characteristics of the environment, the task, and the learner. Completely. I have no problem with that. Of course, it's very sensible. It's just not the only answer. It's not the complete answer. And no one has the complete answer.
If we loop back to the PCDEs as we sort of bring this to a close, one of the things that I'm interested in and I'd like to get your opinion of is maintenance of those skills. If we've got people who've got that full deck of cards, they're really skilled at them, but maybe there's a period of, let's call it skill fade. They just don't execute those skills for whatever reason. They go into a slightly different job role or they're just not using them. In your experience, do you see people lose the ability to apply those PCDEs, or do we need to do things to make sure that those characteristics of excellence are maintained when they are not able to practice them?
There is the apocryphal story of the two people who walk into the golf pro shop, and the first says, oh, my friend would like a golf lesson. And the golfer pro says, certainly. And for you? I said, oh, no, I learned it last week. You have to maintain these skills and enhance them. One of the things that I'm impressed with in high-performing athletes is that they reinvent themselves every year. So they end the year and say, where was I? What have I done? What am I going to do next? One of the things I'm impressed with military settings is that people are redeployed and retrained. So I'll be a specialist in this, then I'll learn to be a specialist in this, and now this. What you see in good business, and I pick out Maersk, AP Muller and Company, who cross-refer people. 1 minute I'm managing a chemical engineering plant, the next 2 I'm doing marketing. So they will move people about. And what that requires is that I constantly have to refine and revise my skills and my skill set. So the fundamental set of skills that I have as a practitioner are portrayed to different challenges. A feature of all the people I've ever seen who are high performers is that they are reviewing and revising. They're looking back and going, how could I have done that better? And peer supervision, which is in some dimensions of psychology is a requirement, for me is absolutely essential. So I would be turning to my colleagues or people I know and people who disagree with me and say, how would you do this? Check my arithmetic on this. And I spend a lot of time reading the work from people whose perspective I disagree with, because I pick up stuff. But I don't just pick up stuff why I think their perspective is wrong. I pick up stuff where their perspective is right. And it's a more parsimonious, it's a better answer. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does.
One of my heroes is a guy called Richard Feynman. He's a Nobel laureate physicist. And he said, if a theory isn't sufficiently parsimonious to explain to a first-year undergrad, it's not a good theory. In other words, make everything as simple as it can be, but no simpler.
Dave, this has been a fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure JP, I won't put words into your mouth, but I know JP's learned a lot because he's always learning. He's
always learning, mate. Always learning.
We'll get some of your books and some of the articles that you mentioned into the show notes, but if people do want to contact you, learn about what you're up to, what's the best way for people to do that?
They can either go info@greymattersuk.com or they can come straight to me, dave@greymattersuk.com. Grey Matters clearly for my ash blonde hairstyle.
We'll get that into the show notes. The final question, Dave, over to you. We give you the opportunity to wrap the episode up for us. So this is just your chance to tell us something maybe you have not mentioned yet, to reiterate something that you feel is particularly important. or anything in between?
One of the biggest things that I've learned on the way through all the variety of different experiences I've had, is reflecting on how things worked and how I could make things better. In parallel to that, I've had to recognise that there are some things I could do that would make me more effective in the job, but rather than crawling up someone's backside or agreeing to what I thought were nonsensical policies, I've put the people I've worked for and with first. My athletes, my performers, my students. So do what you'll do, but do it so you're comfortable.
Dave, thank you very much. Let's finish there.
Brilliant, mate. Absolutely awesome.
That's it for this week's episode of the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and if you found this valuable, take a moment to rate and review the podcast. If you know someone who'd benefit from today's conversation, then please share this with them. We're always keen to hear your thoughts. If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or topics that you'd love us to cover, then email us at info@ophp.co.uk or connect with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep striving, keep improving, and keep optimizing your performance.